I knew moving into a neighborhood with an HOA was a gamble, but I figured it couldn't be worse than my last place until Francine Fletcher showed up on my front porch with a clipboard, a fake smile, and a voice that could sand drywall. Mr. Granger Allard, we've had several reports of strange noises coming from your attic at night, she said, arms crossed like a mall cop who just caught a teenager sneaking sodas. I blinked. My attic, that's news to me. I work night shifts at the hospital, there's no one up there. Francine tilted her head, clearly not buying it. Well, as president of the Silver Pines HOA, it's my duty to make sure community standards are upheld. Persistent noises could be a code violation under Section 4, Subclause 3. Subclause 3, I repeated. That's oddly specific. She didn't laugh. Just jotted something on her clipboard and said, if it continues, we'll have to take action. This was the third time she'd come to my door in 2 weeks. First, it was the color of my porch light. Then it was the placement of my trash bins. Now, ghost noises in my attic. I didn't have time for this. I was already juggling 12-hour ER shifts and barely saw my own bed. 3 nights later, I got home around 2 in the morning. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw the side gate swinging slightly. Strange, I always locked that. I walked around the side, flashlight in hand, and noticed something even weirder. The attic window was cracked open, no way. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, all my senses on high alert. The house was quiet, too quiet. I tiptoed upstairs, heart pounding, and pulled down the attic ladder. Something shifted above me. I climbed up slowly, flashlight beam sweeping the dusty corners until it landed on something that made my blood boil. Francine. In my attic, kneeling next to the insulation with a notepad in her lap. She shrieked when she saw me. Oh, I was just checking for the source of the noise. I thought I heard something tonight and you broke into my house, I said, voice low and steady. My house? I didn't break in, she snapped, standing up and brushing off her khakis like this was some casual inspection. As HOA president, I'm allowed to investigate disturbances for the safety of the community. That's not a law, that's not even close to being legal, she huffed. You're overreacting. I didn't touch anything, you should be thanking me. I backed down the ladder, phone already in my hand. I'm calling the cops. You wouldn't dare, she said, eyes narrowing. I didn't respond. I just walked outside, dialed, and waited for the sirens. But what Francine didn't know, I'd installed a security camera in the hallway 2 days earlier, and it caught her entering through the attic vent. She somehow popped open from the roof with a crowbar. She had no idea I had the footage, but she would soon. The patrol car rolled up just as Francine was halfway down my front steps, trying to play it cool like she hadn't just been caught lurking in someone's attic in the middle of the night. The officer stepped out, Officer Damon, a guy I'd seen around town a few times. He eyed her clipboard, then turned to me. You the one who called? He asked, already sizing up the situation. Yeah, I said, keeping my voice even. She was in my attic, I've got it on camera. Francine didn't wait for him to ask questions. Officer, there's been a misunderstanding. I was performing a safety inspection due to multiple nuisance reports. I'm the HOA president, he held up a hand. Ma'am, being on someone's property without permission, especially inside their home, is not part of any homeowner association's job. We're talking criminal trespass minimum. Possibly breaking and entering. She straightened, nostrils flaring. I didn't damage anything. I simply entered to verify a concern. It's within the HOA's rights to investigate potential threats to community well-being. I opened the video file on my phone and played it. The screen clearly showed her crawling through the attic vent, crowbar in hand, then dropping down onto the insulation and scribbling in her notebook like she was surveying a crime scene. Officer Damon watched in silence. Then he looked at her. So you want to explain how you think that's legal? Francine's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He radioed in, asked for backup, and cuffed her right there on my front lawn while she kept insisting she had the authority. I stood by the porch light, arms crossed, watching her sputter as the second cruiser pulled up. They took her away without another word to me, but the damage hers, not mine, was just getting started. The next morning, I called in a favor. My cousin Melanie worked for the county clerk's office, and I asked her what kind of precedent the HOA might try to use to justify Francine's stunt. She got back to me an hour later with a quiet but ominous, "You need to see something." I drove down to the office during my lunch break. Melanie slid a manila folder across the counter, her eyes serious. She's been filing amendments to the HOA charter, quietly. She's been adding clauses, vague ones that give her broad powers to inspect for safety compliance and intervene in matters of perceived risk. The language is loose, but she filed it all with forged homeowner signatures. I flipped through the pages. My name was on one of them. So was my neighbor Cedric's and Mrs. Havorson's, who hadn't left her house in 2 years. "She's been faking votes," I said, stunned. "Looks that way," Melanie said. "And unless someone challenges it legally, it stays on record." That was all I needed to hear. By the time I got home, news of Francine's arrest had already made the rounds. My neighbor across the street, Mira, caught me outside. "Granger, is it true? Did she really go through your roof?" "Attic vent," I said. "And yeah, I've got the footage," she shook her head. I knew she was overstepping, but that's insane. You should see our HOA group thread. People are furious. That gave me an idea. I didn't wait. I emailed every homeowner I could reach with a simple invite: emergency HOA town hall, my place, Friday night. Bring questions and documents. By Friday, my garage was packed. Lawn chairs lined up in rows, neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder, murmuring with the unease of people who finally realized the wolf had been in charge of the henhouse all along. I stepped up onto an overturned crate and held up the folder. "I've got proof. Francine forged votes to pass new rules none of us agreed to. She used those rules to justify entering my home without permission. She's been creating a paper trail that makes it look like we gave her power we never actually approved." "Why?" someone shouted. "To consolidate control," said Mira, stepping up beside me. "She fined me for having wind chimes, said they were auditory clutter. I thought it was ridiculous, but I paid it. Thought it'd be easier than fighting." "She fined me for leaving a garden hose coiled the wrong way," said Cedric. "Said it was a tripping hazard." Someone else added, "She threatened to put a lien on my house over a mailbox that was too cheerful." The room buzzed. I raised my voice. "We need to vote to suspend the board and file for a full audit. That includes all financial records, votes, and amendments. We bring in an independent mediator, and if that doesn't work, we go to court." A woman in the back raised her hand. "Isn't she still the president?" "Not if she's convicted," I said. "And considering the video, the forged documents, and the crowbar, she's got bigger problems than our bylaws." The vote was unanimous. Even the retired couple who usually avoided anything louder than a doorbell raised their hands. I filed the petition for the audit the next morning. By Monday, Francine's bail was posted by some poor soul who clearly hadn't gotten the memo. She showed up on my front lawn again, this time flanked by 2 men in suits. "I've been advised not to speak to you," she said, but her tone was brittle. "But I will say this, you've made a mistake going against me." I didn't answer. I handed one of the suits a sealed envelope instead. Inside, copies of the fake charter amendments, the video footage, and a written statement from Melanie affirming the forgery. He glanced at the contents, then back at Francine. "You didn't mention this." Francine's jaw locked. By the end of the week, she was formally charged with trespassing, breaking and entering, and document falsification. The last one hit hardest felony level. That meant disqualification from any leadership position involving finances or governance in the future. The HOA board, what was left of it, collapsed like a wet paper bag. Turns out, most of them had been rubber stamping whatever she handed them. They resigned quietly, all except one guy named Joel who admitted he'd never even read the documents she gave him. We replaced them with a steering committee made up of actual residents. Mira took the lead, and Cedric volunteered as treasurer. I stayed in the background but helped draft a community oversight proposal to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. The best part? The city council got involved after I submitted the forged amendments to the county clerk. They launched a broader investigation into HOA abuse citywide. Francine wasn't just the tip of the iceberg, she was the warning bell. I came home one evening a few weeks later to find a card taped to my door. It was from Mrs. Haverson in careful cursive. "Thank you for protecting our homes when no one else could." I smiled. For the first time in a long while, Silver Pines felt like a neighborhood again, not a dictatorship with flowerbed regulations. And Francine? Last I heard, she was negotiating a plea deal and trying to argue she was overzealous, not criminal. Too late for that. The addict told the truth. And so did the tape. 2 weeks after Francine's arrest, our neighborhood was still untangling the fallout. The steering committee held its first official meeting in Mira's backyard under a string of mismatched patio lights, with chairs borrowed from every garage on the block. The air had that tense but hopeful energy you get when people realize they've been asleep at the wheel. But the engine's still running. Mira took roll, then looked around at the dozen or so folks who'd rallied to rebuild the mess Francine left behind. "We've got a problem," she said, skipping any pleasantries. "The HOA's financials, or what's left of them, don't match the dues we've all been paying." Cedric, now serving as interim treasurer, held up a stack of spreadsheets. "There's over $70,000 unaccounted for." The outgoing board left behind a single folder and a password-protected flash drive. No backups, no receipts, just a ledger that stopped 6 months ago. A low murmur spread through the group. Several people leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "She was embezzling?" asked Claudia, who ran the local bakery and had been fined last year for putting up a chalkboard menu sign. "Looks that way," Cedric said. "We found a P.O. box registered under the HOA's name. She'd been routing certain payments there instead of the association's official account." "How long's that been going on?" asked Dominic, a retired firefighter who'd always kept to himself until recently. Cedric lowered his eyes. "At least a year, possibly more. We've submitted what we have to the DA's office, but we're still combing through incomplete records." Mira stood, brushing her hands on her jeans. "We need a full forensic audit." Francine wasn't just abusing power, she was siphoning money while threatening fines and liens to keep us too scared to question it. That night, I pulled out the little black notebook I'd started keeping after the break-in. Every time something new surfaced, missing funds, forged signatures, abuse of authority, I wrote it down. I didn't want to forget the details. Not because I didn't trust the new committee, but because I'd seen what happened when people assumed someone else would handle it. The next morning, a white SUV idled outside my house for nearly 40 minutes. I watched from the kitchen window as the driver, a man in a gray suit, sat staring at my front door without stepping out. When I finally walked outside, he drove off without so much as a glance. That night, I installed 2 more security cameras. The following week, Mira called a closed meeting with only the core steering group. When I arrived, Cedric was already pacing. "We found something else," Mira said as she shut the gate behind me. "And it's worse." Cedric dropped a thick folder on the table. "This isn't just stolen money. Francine signed off on a loan." "A loan?" I asked. "From where?" "Private lender. Not a bank. The terms are brutal 30% interest, personal guarantees signed under the HOA's name." But here's the kicker: she identified herself as the sole fiduciary authority. No one else on the board signed it. I flipped through the documents. The lender's name wasn't one I recognized, but the notary stamp on the contract looked off. The seal was partially smudged and the signature looked like it had been traced. "That's not a real notary," I said. "I've seen enough medical forms to know a fake stamp when I see one." Mira nodded. "We already sent it to a legal consultant. They confirmed the signature's forged." "She faked a witness and notarized it herself, or had someone do it for her." Cedric leaned forward. "We think she used the loan to cover the money she already took. She was backfilling the hole with borrowed cash, and if we hadn't caught it, the HOA would have defaulted. That would have let the lender come after all of us for repayment. I could feel the tension coil in the room like a live wire. She was setting us up to take the fall, I said, for her own theft. Mira's jaw tightened. We're taking it to the county fraud division tomorrow. They're already building a case, but this escalates it. This is no longer just a financial audit. It's fraud, wire transfer violations, and falsified legal documents. That evening, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the folder. The woman had crawled into my attic, accused me of violating noise codes, and tried to fine me for things that didn't exist. And all the while, she was stealing from every single person on the block. The next day, I accompanied Mira and Cedric to the county offices. The fraud investigator, an older woman named Renata with the kind of expression that stayed unreadable even when she blinked, reviewed the documents in silence. When she reached the forged notary, she turned to her assistant. Get this filed under HOA 57. Flag for urgent review. And pull any other associations with matching P.O. boxes. Are there others? Cedric asked. Renata looked up. Depends. Some of these rogue HOAs run in clusters. We've seen a few where former board members hop from one association to the next, especially if they get forced out. They recycle the same tactics: fines, threats, fake amendments. It's a pattern. That night, 2 unmarked sedans rolled into Silver Pines. I stood on my porch as agents knocked on the door of Francine's house. A light flicked on upstairs, then a second one. 10 minutes later, they walked her out in handcuffs again, but this time, it wasn't for trespassing. Word spread fast. The next morning, neighbors gathered outside Mira's place while Cedric printed out a list of new bylaws for review. Nobody shouted. Nobody argued. They just nodded, and passed the papers along. Dominic folded his arms. We should make it so no one person can ever hold that much control again, not even with a unanimous vote. That's what we're doing, Mira said. Checks, balances, and mandatory transparency. No more secret votes. No more fines without full documentation, and every resident gets access to financials. I added, let's put a clause in requiring a community review board, randomly selected residents, rotating every 6 months, no ties to the board, no conflicts of interest. It passed on the spot. 3 weeks later, Francine's house went up for sale. The for sale sign had no HOA endorsement logo on it, just a plain white post with a phone number. Mira said the DA was pursuing felony charges, and that Francine's license to manage community associations, something none of us knew, she even had already been revoked. One afternoon, I got a knock at my door. It was the same Officer Damon who had responded the night of the break-in. He had a copy of the final report. Figured you'd want this, he said. You were the first one to step up. I accepted it without a word. He paused, then added, just so you know, this case kicked off a broader investigation. Found another HOA a few counties over doing something similar. Looks like this might be bigger than just Francine. He left, and I stood there for a while watching the street. No patrol cars, no silent subs. Just Cedric walking his dog and Claudia waving from her front porch. Later that week, I dismantled the extra cameras. Kept the originals, though just in case. Francine's trial was scheduled for the fall. The DA's office told us they'd be calling several of us as witnesses. Mira was already prepping statements, and Cedric had been asked to submit all the financial records we'd recovered. As for me, I made copies of the attic footage, the forged documents, and every note in my black notebook. I wasn't worried about testifying. I'd been trained to stay calm under pressure. Working in an ER teaches you how to keep breathing when everything's on fire. And this was just a different kind of emergency, one we had finally brought under control. The morning after Officer Damon delivered the final report, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. Mr. Allard, this is Assistant District Attorney Leona Marquez. I'm overseeing the prosecution for the HOA-related fraud case. We need to speak in person. Today, if possible. Her voice was clipped and professional but not cold. I agreed to meet her at the county courthouse, where she ushered me into a windowless office with a battered file cabinet and a pot of burnt coffee that had probably been sitting since yesterday. "We've identified additional victims," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "And a potential accomplice." I opened the folder and saw a photo of a man in a navy polo with a Silver Pines HOA embroidered logo, one of the board members who'd resigned quietly after Francine's arrest. I didn't remember his name, but I recognized his face. He'd been at the first emergency town hall, sitting in the back row, silent the entire time. "Name's Brett Landry," Marquez said. "He helped set up that P.O. box. We traced 2 wire transfers from the HOA's account to a business registered in his name. Landscaping company that doesn't appear to own a single mower." "He never said a word at the meetings," I said. "He probably thought it would blow over if he laid low, but we're treating him as a co-conspirator now. Francine's attorney filed a motion this morning trying to paint her as the pawn. Says Brett was the one handling the money." I shook my head. "That's not what the forged amendments said. She signed off on everything." "We know," Marquez said. "It's not going to work, but we need your testimony on the extent of the forgery and how you discovered it. And more importantly, we need to establish that she used her position to intimidate residents into compliance." I agreed, and she handed me a subpoena. "Trial starts next month. Be ready." When I left the courthouse, the air felt heavier. Like the whole situation had deepened into something uglier than any of us had guessed. This wasn't just about some power-hungry HOA president anymore. This was organized theft under the guise of neighborhood management. That evening, I stopped by Mira's place. She was on her porch with Dominic and Claudia, gathered around a small table covered in notes and a laptop. "Ada Marquez contacted me today," I said. "There's another name involved, Brett Landry." Claudia's eyes widened. "He's the one who signed off on my gate violation." Said it was functionally offensive. I thought he was just parroting Francine. "He wasn't just parroting," I said. "He was pocketing." Mira leaned back. "So it wasn't just her, it was a network." I nodded. "She was the face, but he was moving funds, possibly more." Dominic exhaled slowly. "That explains the contractor trucks that parked outside his place every weekend for months. Never saw a single worker get out, just him unloading boxes." "Think he was laundering?" Claudia asked. "Maybe," Mira said. "But if the DA's already found wire transfers, then it's not just speculation anymore. They've got the paper trail." From that point on, the committee became more than just a temporary patch. We formalized the group into the Silver Pines Neighborhood Alliance, a legal nonprofit with oversight authority approved by a community petition. We drafted new covenants under a lawyer's guidance, eliminating any clause that gave unchecked power to a single board member. Every rule now had to pass a public vote and be published online for review. The city council even invited us to speak. Mira and I stood at a podium under the bright fluorescence of the chamber's public hall as we laid out everything. The illegal amendments, the threats, the breach of privacy, the embezzlement, and now the potential money laundering. Councilwoman Ortega leaned forward when Mira finished. "And you're saying this all happened under the legal shield of an HOA charter?" "It was the perfect disguise," I said. "People are conditioned to fear HOAs. They don't question the notices. They just pay the fines and stay quiet." "Not anymore," Mira added. 2 weeks later, the courthouse was packed on the first day of the trial. Francine sat at the defense table in a muted gray suit, hair pulled back, jaw tense. Brett Landry sat behind her with his own attorney, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. The prosecution opened with footage from my attic. The moment Francine crawled through the vent, the room went silent. When the video showed her squatting in my insulation with a notepad, a low murmur rippled through the gallery. Then came the documents, the forged amendments, the fake notary signature, the P.O. box receipts. Ada Marquez paced slowly as each exhibit was entered, her tone calm but relentless. When I was called to testify, I walked to the stand with the black notebook in my coat pocket, not to read from, but to remind myself why I was there. I kept my answers direct. Described how I'd installed the cameras, what I saw, what I heard. How I discovered the forged documents through my cousin. How the residents rallied once they saw the full picture. Francine's attorney tried to paint her as a misguided but well-meaning leader who had been manipulated by others. I didn't flinch. She didn't act like she was being manipulated when she broke into my home, I said. She acted like she owned it. By the third day, Brett's attorney requested a separate trial. That was denied. On the fifth day, he flipped. He cut a deal with the prosecution in exchange for a lighter sentence and gave up everything. The dummy landscaping company, the second P.O. box, the shell accounts, and a third co-conspirator, someone none of us had suspected. A former HOA treasurer from 2 years prior, long since moved to another neighborhood, now working as a financial consultant for 3 other associations in the county. The courtroom tensed as the name was read into the record. It meant this wasn't just a fluke, it was a system. In the end, Francine was convicted on all counts: criminal trespass, unlawful entry, document forgery, financial fraud, and conspiracy. Brett pled guilty and agreed to restitution. The third co-conspirator was arrested within 48 hours of the verdict. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Francine got 6 years in state prison. Brett received 2 with 5 years probation and a restitution order. The court ordered an audit of every HOA the third conspirator had ever worked with. When the gavel dropped, I didn't cheer. Nobody did. We just exhaled. Months passed. The Silver Pines Neighborhood Alliance grew stronger. We held quarterly reviews open to every resident. Each one drew a crowd not because people were angry, but because they finally believed their voices mattered. I returned to my shifts at the hospital, finally able to sleep during the day without wondering if someone was crawling through my attic. The cameras stayed, but the footage was boring again, just squirrels and the occasional delivery driver. One afternoon, I came home to find a small package on my doorstep. No return address. Inside, a plain envelope and a key. The note read, "For the lockbox under her floorboards. We thought you should have it. She kept everything." No signature, but I knew who it was from. I opened the rusted lockbox with the key and found a stack of receipts, handwritten notes, and a burner phone. One item stood out: a list of addresses, 6 neighborhoods, all with HOAs, all with the same treasurer's name attached in prior years. I called Marquez. She sent an investigator out that same day. By the time the year ended, the city had dissolved 3 more HOA boards, each found to have financial irregularities traced back to that same ring. One of them had even tried to take out a loan using neighborhood dues as collateral, just like Francine had. Silver Pines became the case study. Ada Marquez gave a speech at the state housing conference titled "When Control Becomes Corruption: The Hidden Risks of Unchecked HOAs." I watched the recording online. At the end, she showed the attic footage. The audience gasped. That was the night the state passed a new bill mandating HOA financial transparency, annual audits, and mandatory third-party oversight for all associations over 50 homes. They called it the Allard Act. I didn't expect that. I didn't want recognition. But I was glad it meant nobody else would have to go through what we did. The neighborhood changed. Not just in policy, but in spirit. People talked more, shared tools, helped each other with projects instead of issuing citations. We built a community garden where the old HOA office used to be. Mira ran it like clockwork, and Claudia painted a mural on the side of her bakery celebrating the neighborhood's rebirth. One evening, I stood in the middle of my street, watching kids ride their bikes while neighbors sipped coffee on porches. It felt real again, not dictated, not enforced. Just lived, and above me the attic window stayed shut. Locked, quiet, exactly how it should be.